if I can listen to what he can tell me, if I can understand how it seems to him, if I can sense its personal meaning, then I will be releasing potent forces of change in him. If I can really understand how he hates his father, that could be a conversation that can go on for months. Or hates the university, or hates communists. If I can catch the flavor of his fear of insanity, or his fear of atom bombs, or of Russia, you can tell that this is a little old. It will be of the greatest help to him in altering those very hatreds and fears, and in establishing realistic and harmonious relationships with the very people and situations towards which he has felt hatred and fear. So, for example, let's say someone comes into a therapeutic session and they say, geez, I was just having a conversation with my father. I just hate my father. Every time I talk to him, it just makes me angry. And like that's a low resolution representation, right? It's like 1 pixel. Father equals anger. It's not differentiated. And that's a problem because like their body's responding as if this person needs to be taken out, like you might take out a prey object or something like that, or destroyed. Because that's what anger is like, right? Anger is sort of like, you're an object to be destroyed. And there's truth in that because it wouldn't be elicited by the father unless there was some necessity for the anger. But it's so generalized and global, it's not helpful. It's like, okay, let's talk about your father. Well, how would you do that? Well, what did he do recently to upset you? And then you listen, and you don't give the person advice about what they should have done, because what the hell do you know about what they should have done? You might have to listen for 50 hours before you could offer a helpful suggestion. Even then, it probably won't work. So you listen, and then they tell you some stories about, this is almost like the Freudian psychoanalytic approach. They tell you some stories about what their father was like when they're in their childhood, and then a bunch of things that pop up in memory, and you know, they start laying out the story. It's like they're laying cards out on a table, and they just lay out all these cards. There's like 1,000 cards, and they're all representations of the father. And then they sort of exhaust themselves. They're out of angry stories about their father. And then maybe they say, well, you know, he wasn't all bad. Then they start laying out some things about him that, you know, he drank all the time, but he always took care of us, and he wasn't an angry drunk. You know, and he stayed with my mother, and, you know, so what's happening now is the picture of the father is getting differentiated, right? It's not just 1 pixel, it's differentiated. And then you might say, well, okay, here's all these angry things. How many of them are still relevant? Like, how many of those do you have to deal with? And the person will think, well, these, you know, 80% of these anger things are dead, they're in the past. And, you know, 70% of these good things weren't good enough to make up for the rest of this mess. But then you get a smaller pile of specific things. And then maybe you can start figuring out ways that, or the person can start figuring out ways that those might be addressed moment to moment in new conversations. Like it's a strategic plan. What's the situation? What exactly is going on here? Lay it out. And the emotions are a great guide to that, because the first thing you want to do is everything that makes you emotional. Those are the things that aren't dealt with yet. They're not fully articulated. You don't have a strategy. You don't have a full developed representational system. That's why it's still emotional. So it's like your body and your mind come up with emotional representations first, and only as you work through them, which means to talk about them essentially, strategically, they don't even turn into words until you do that. And that's where I think Freud went wrong. It's those things aren't repressed, although they can be. They're not repressed. They just never made it all the way up to articulated representation. And lots of things are like that. Whenever you're in a bad mood, it's like, I'm in a bad mood. Well, what does that mean? Well, you don't know. Well, why don't you know? Are you repressing it? No, you're just too stupid to figure it out. And so then you got to talk to someone. You know, I'm in a bad mood. And, you know, well, you know, how are you feeling? And they'll get all spiteful and tell you how they're feeling. And then, you know, they start to differentiate it. Maybe they'll remember something that happened at work, and then you can kind of map out the mood, and that starts to loosen it.